Greetings and welcome to the channel. This is Michaela from Team Retrog, where we like retro games and the devices that bring them to us. Today we are looking at the OneXFly. This is a Windows x86 handheld. This handheld has an AMD Ryzen 7840U CPU, and that chip is crammed in a small device, making this a pretty decent rival for the ROG Ally as well as the AYN Loki. I've had this device for about a week now, so we're going to split my thoughts into two videos, starting here with my initial impressions of this device. So let's dive in and let's get to work. So let's start by talking about cost. This device is starting at $1,000 on OneXPlayer's website. They just wrapped up their Indiegogo campaign, and so those units are going out to early bird backers now, and if you purchase one through their website, it is expected to ship in mid-October into November. Let's hop on our mount and head on into Spec Town. So what we are rocking with the OneXFly is an AMD Ryzen 7840U with 8 cores and 16 threads. Our GPU is an AMD RDNA 3 integrated graphics, and your unit will come with either 1 or 2 terabytes of NVMe storage with micro SD expansion as well. You also have an option of going from 16 all the way to 64 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM. The unit that I have is a 1 terabyte 32 gigabyte of RAM model. The screen is a 7-inch 1080p display capable of a 120Hz refresh rate, and the battery is a 48 watt-hour battery, which is actually better than both the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally. You also have multiple ports on this device. You have 2 USB-C ports as well as a USB-A port, which will make this great for docking as well as file transfers. The device has dual speakers tuned by Harman, and you do have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity. And the device ships with Windows 11 Home. So let's go ahead and unbox this bad boy. I was one of OneXPlayer's early backers, so I received this unit about a week and a half ago. I bought it with my own money, therefore all opinions are 100% my own. And I also paid extra for a bundle that included a case as well as engraving on the device itself. So let's go ahead and take all this plastic and paper off, and let's take a look at the case first. Opening up the case, there really isn't too much to see here except for the little silica gel packet that you get. Let's throw this away and be sure not to eat it. And the case is about the same as the OneXPlayer 2 case, except it is form-fitted for the OneXFly, which means there's no pomp and circumstance here. It's just a case for only the device and not much else. So let's go ahead and empty out the rest of this box, and we'll get the unit. And they also sent me a micro SD card, which was really cool because I don't remember that being in the bundle. For me, 128 gigabytes is not enough for a device like this, so we're going to put this in another handheld, and we're going to use a 1 terabyte. Taking off all the plastic and opening the box, we're going to notice that this has a very premium feel to this, which is what you would expect when you're paying almost $1,000 or more for a handheld PC. And the package is very well protected. You have a couple of layers before you actually get to the device itself, as well as an included screen protector, which I'm not going to use because I find that these end up affecting the touch inputs, and I'd rather have a smooth experience when using my device. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and take the device out and see what else we have inside of the box. OneX always seems to include a manual with details on how to use the device, and that also seems to be the case here. You have a quick start manual that details what each of the buttons do, as well as the different aspects of the device and what to do in case you need to recover it to factory settings. You also get a charging brick as well as a USB-C cable, and I couldn't quite figure out the wattage of the charging brick, but I have to assume that it is a 65 watt fast charger because that's usually what it takes to charge a device like this. But now let's go ahead and put the box away and let's take a look at the device itself. So here I am taking it out of its plastic, and this is very well protected. There is also a layer of plastic covering the screen as well as the vents on the back. So we need to actually take those off in order to fully access the device. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start with our device tour. And we're going to start at the top with the triggers and bumpers, which to me feel like they have the right amount of travel. I actually don't like my triggers to move too far. I like them to be a little quicker, and these seem to fit the bill. And then next to the LB and RB, there are two M1 and M2 buttons, very similar to that of Neo devices, and these operate as different programmable functions. I keep one of them as the Xbox button, and I keep the other one as a secondary button so I can access various hotkeys when navigating Windows. We also have a headphone jack, a USB-C port at the top, as well as a USB-A port, which makes it much easier for file transfer via USB. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the joysticks on the front. And these are smaller Hall sensing joysticks. They come in at about 15.3 millimeters. So by contrast, let's go ahead and grab a standard Xbox controller, because this is what I consider to be the standard for joysticks. And those come in at about 16.2 millimeters. So we're talking about 1 millimeter difference in size between the OneXFly and an Xbox controller, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it definitely makes the OneXFly joysticks feel smaller than normal. However, I do like that they went with a more diagonal pattern between joystick to face buttons and joystick to D-pad. To me, that makes things a lot more comfortable and is more like an Xbox controller as opposed to a Nintendo Switch Joy-Con. And you could see that the ROG Ally uses that same diagonal placement. So let's go ahead and measure the joysticks for the OneX player compared to that of the ROG Ally, which I feel is the biggest competitor for a device like the OneXFly. And those are also smaller joysticks, coming in at about 15.6 millimeters. However, if I have to choose, I would prefer the joysticks on the ROG Ally. But then let's go ahead and take a look at the OneXFly's big brother, the OneX Player 2, and you'll notice that even though that is a much bigger device, it actually has slightly smaller joysticks. And I can excuse the smaller joysticks on the OneXFly. I can't necessarily excuse them on something like the OneX Player 2, considering it is a much bigger device with a removable controller. So if I had to choose between the joysticks on the OneXFly versus the joysticks on the OneX Player 2, I would pick the ones on the OneXFly every time. Now let's go ahead, move away from the joystick, and take a look at the D-pad. And as far as performance, I do enjoy this D-pad. I feel like it does have a good amount of travel to it, and it does feel good to use, but I haven't tested it on fighting games yet. We're going to save that for my in-depth review. However, there is a bit of a gap in the points of the D-pad between the D-pad itself and the unit, and while that's probably meant to enhance the travel, I do worry about dust gathering over time. The front of the device houses a 7-inch 120Hz refresh rate screen capable of outputting at 1080p. You also have start and select buttons, as well as a button on the bottom left that functions as a show desktop feature. This cannot be remapped or changed. And then you have the turbo button, which brings up the OneXFly software, as well as a keyboard button. And of course, your 4 face buttons in Xbox style format. At the bottom of the device, you have 2 downward-facing speakers tuned by Harman, as well as a micro SD card slot and a USB-C slot. Now, these speakers could have very easily been put on the front of the device, but they reserved that for the special engraving. And then you have on the back of the device your typical fan intake, and you have exhaust on the top. Now let's take a closer look at the face buttons of the OneXFly, and we're going to grab Callie one more time, and we're going to measure those buttons as well. And let's just go ahead and start with the Y button, and that's coming in at 8.6 millimeters. Again, let's grab a standard Xbox controller, and the Y button here measures in at 10.1 millimeters. So the buttons on the OneXFly are definitely coming in as smaller. However, let's check a device with smaller buttons like the Neo Air Plus. And these buttons come in at 7.0 millimeters, what Joey from Joey's Retro Handhelds would call baby buttons. And if we grab the OneX Player 2, you're going to notice that the buttons look very similar, so I'm led to believe that OneX decided to use these same buttons, and if we go ahead and measure them, sure enough, they are coming in at a very similar measurement. So while they might not be the same buttons on both devices, they are pretty close. Alright, let's put Callie away and grab Scaly so that we can see that the OneX Player comes in at about 604 grams. So let's compare to some different x86 Windows handhelds. The Neo Air Plus comes in at about 512 grams. The ROG Ally is very close at about 618 grams, which surprises me how close in weight these two devices are. The Steam Deck is going to obviously come in heavier at about 818 grams with the kill switch case on it. And then finally, the OneX Player Daddy Edition, aka the OneX Player 2, comes in at a whopping 852 grams with nothing additional on it. This puts the OneXFly as a nice middle ground handheld. Not too heavy, not too light, and pretty close in comfort to the ROG Ally. So now let's take a quick tour of the OneX Player software, and you'll notice right at the top of this quick settings menu, we can adjust the TDP up to 30 watts, and we can also adjust our fan curve on the fly. We have an automatic one already pre-configured, and we can toggle between that and 2 manual presets. You can also adjust the controller vibration. I like to keep it off. And then we have 6 quick setting options in the middle here, starting with the resolution, so we can change the resolution on the fly between several different presets. I like to keep it at 720p, but you can also bump it up to 1080p depending on your use case. In the middle, you can adjust the RGB lighting of the ring around the joysticks, as well as the engraving on the bottom. So you can pick from a bunch of different color patterns, or you can go with a pure color, and there are 3 levels of RGB brightness that you can set the lights to. And I find that the highest level of brightness is actually not too intrusive, unlike something like the AYN Loki. And so generally I'll keep the LEDs at level 3, and then if I'm using the device late at night, I'll turn it down to 1 or turn them off entirely. But let's go ahead and turn the lights off here so you can see what the LEDs look like in a dark setting. And you'll also notice that the engraving on the bottom does not say OneXFly, it actually says Retrogue, because I paid a little bit extra to get that custom engraving. Unfortunately, I wanted it to say Team on the left and Retrogue on the right, and I emailed OneX to see if this was possible, and they pretty sternly told me that it was not. They would only do engraving of one 8-letter word, so luckily Retrogue fit in those 8 letters, and that's what I kind of had to settle for. But I do wish that OneX would set some other customization options in the future, because some YouTube channels or some people want different things on each side, and it's really unfortunate that they wouldn't accommodate. Moving on with the software tour, on the right here there is an option to pull up stats during a game or app, as well as an ability to fine-tune the performance. And unfortunately, you need to install 2 programs to do that, but the OneX software will guide you to that. And once you've done that, you now can adjust the frame rate as well as set up a dynamic TDP with a maximum frame rate if you so choose. And then you can also set the theme to horizontal, vertical, and you could set the zoom level that you want your stats to display in. Now the controls on the bottom allow you to adjust the CPU if you want to leave it at 100, turn on turbo boost, or tone it down if you have a game that doesn't use as much power. And then you also have controls for gyroscope, depending on how you want your gyro to control for things like first-person shooters. You have a sound vibration option, which I can't figure out how to get working, so I just leave that turned off. And of course, you have brightness and volume adjustment right in this app. And then if you go into the settings, you could do a bunch of things such as turn on auto boot, as well as enable a virtual keyboard. And I personally don't like OneX's solution for a virtual keyboard, because while it does look flashy and it is movable, if you need to search something up in Windows, when you pull up the start menu, there's no way to get the keyboard to pop in front of the Windows start menu. So what I like to do instead is I like to keep this feature turned off and use replace OSK in order to have the Windows 11 keyboard show up instead. And then I don't have this problem anymore with the keyboard. Before getting into gameplay, let's just take a look at the OneX launcher. And this is pretty consistent with every other launcher that comes with a Windows Handheld. However, this one does not seem as feature-packed. There is very little you can do as far as changing your options. As a matter of fact, what's on the screen is pretty much it. And so while you can aggregate all of your game storefronts here, and you can add to favorites, or you can hide the games that you don't want to see, that's really all you can do, and it will scrape artwork for you, but it really won't give you any additional options to customize. And so you're better off with something like Play Night or Steam Big Picture Mode, because those launchers will give you more options. Now, since I've only had the device for a short time, I've only been able to test a little bit of emulation as well as PC gaming, so I will go over the ways in which I was able to test this device in just the short amount of time that I've had it. And obviously 8 and 16-bit systems like Game Boy Advance are going to work just fine, but they're also going to look absolutely beautiful with a normal 4x filter, as well as a shining shimmerless shader that I'll leave a link in the video description for. But on the other end of the spectrum, I also booted up Yuzu and did some Nintendo Switch emulation testing. And so here I am playing Dragon Quest Builders. I got the urge to play this game after talking on the Retro Handhelds Discord. We got into a little bit of a conversation about it. And so I booted it up on the OneXFly. And aside from a couple of graphical issues, assets being invisible and that kind of thing, this game ran just fine. And for this game, I was able to bring the TDP down to 10 watts, which should net us about 2 hours, if not a little bit more of gameplay. And then I said to myself, Mikhailov, what crazy thing can you do on this device to really push it to its limits? And so I answered that question by dropping a 300 gigabyte mod pack. We're talking about 1900 mods, both graphical and gameplay wise. And we took old Skyrim and we made it insane. So not only do I have to jack up the TDP to 18 watts just to attempt to get a stable 30 frames per second, but this also takes somewhere about 5 minutes to actually load into the game. But once I pulled it off and got a somewhat decent frame rate, I ended up having a blast playing Skyrim this way. But just FYI, the fan got very audible while I was playing. And I had to turn the graphic settings all the way to low to attempt to keep the frame rate stable. And so let's tone things down a little bit, and let's go to my go-to game for when I want to chill out and relax, and that would be the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV. So because of the power we are actually packing in this device, at 720p, I was able to up the settings to high laptop, which is about a medium setting for this game. And I started at a low 8 watt TDP because I wanted to see what the game could handle at that low wattage. And while I was able to maintain a 30 frames per second rate with a few dips, jumping it up to a 10 watt TDP allowed me to get that full 40 frames per second, and the impact on battery life was not enough to make it worth dropping the TDP back down. And then finally, we did a driver update and we attempted to play some Starfield. And at an 18 watt TDP, I found that we were only averaging about 30 frames per second. So the game was definitely playable, but there were some frame rate dips here and there. And it wasn't necessarily the best experience all around, but I also jacked up the settings to medium because I didn't want the game to look like butt. So I'm sure if I were to drop things down to low, I would probably get some better performance out of this game. And so let's start to wrap things up with my first impressions of this device. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of all of my opinions. These are just some of the things that I noticed in my first week of testing the OneXFly. And the first thing I want to talk about is not necessarily something that I covered in this video, but it is something that I noticed when I went to wrap up recording my footage of this device. And I just happened to notice that the oils from my fingers as well as my fingerprints were just everywhere, and the device just looked scummy and dirty. And so I went to go clean it, and the plastic that they're using is actually fairly tough to clean. And so if this is something that bothers you, you may be a little bit more inclined to either get a white model or pick a different device altogether. And when I go to finish my in-depth review of this device, I also need to keep in mind that this is a retail unit, so it does have the 120 Hz refresh rate screen. And while it's great to have that option, this is not a FreeSync screen and it doesn't have VRR. And so while the screen itself is still great, it doesn't necessarily have the versatility of something like the ROG Ally, and this device is more expensive than the Ally, so this is also something you need to take into account. And another thing I want to talk about is I really wish there was more engraving variety, especially because this is a device that you are probably not going to be able to resell once you have it engraved. And I kind of wish that One X would give you the option to engrave with 2 words instead of one. Because what if you want to do something like put a first and last name on this device? You're not going to be able to because of the engraving restrictions. And the final impression that I want to give for this video is that this thing is versatile. Not only is it powerful, but it has a fairly beefy battery, which means you can either get power or you can get good battery life. And it's really nice to have that option to pick and choose. Either you can play a lightweight game for long periods of time, or you can play a heavier game for a shorter gaming session. And even then, most of the beefy games that I tested still outputted that they would get about 2 hours, if not 3 hours, of battery under the correct settings. And so let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this a device that is on your radar, or is this a hard pass for you? And feel free to continue the conversation in the Retro Handhelds and the Steam Machine Discord channels. Links are in the description, and if there's anything specific that you want me to test, either let me know in the comments or hit me up in the Discord. And I can't wait to get into the weeds with this device and really see what it can do in preparation for my in-depth final review. But that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and if this was helpful to you in any way, please be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now, and don't stop believing.